Hello friends, tonight we're going to take a look at the Bulgarian Makarov as part of my ongoing series in which we take an excessively detailed look at weird, yet strangely viable defensive firearms. Up front, I'm going to tell you that I plan to make the argument that the Makarov is one of the best and most useful of these strange defensive pistols. It also in many ways typifies Soviet weapons design philosophy, not as Westerners understand it, but as it actually was. By that I mean, it still has this sort of mass-produced shittiness that you see from a country where everyone at the time was poor, starving, and miserable. But with that also comes a very clever design, built for maximum economy of scale and reliability. This is also a gun that, like other Soviet weapons, distinctly understands what it needs to be. In a military context, pistols don't matter. Not really. So the Makarov is small, with few parts firing a round, best described as adequate. The pistol is completely exceptional in its adequateness. This gun was a status symbol, to show an officer's position above the hungry rabble. In a system in which his suffering should have matched their own, he was never as hungry, and the deep polished blue of the slide illustrates that best. That's communism, a sort of nice veneer that covers something very shitty and, frankly, terrifying. But even with the veneer, if you look at it too long, you start to realize that it's just a facade. The Makarov is very well made, like most Soviet weapons, and time was spent on the finish. The finish is really beautiful, isn't it? While leaving the interior very rough. We'll take a look at that later with tool marks everywhere. Yet the gun is extremely reliable and workable. But in the quality of the finish, one can almost feel the patriotism in the workmanship. For a tremendously oppressed people, they sure did make nice guns. If only they'd been able to find those good people some food. And maybe it would have been nice if they'd stopped executing them with the very pistols they were charged with producing. But, what are you going to do? It's communism. It's just how it is. So using our go at us 3 questions of gun design that we've used before, they are, what was the goal, how well was it accomplished, and was it worth doing? We see that the Makarov is really one of the best weapon designs using those metrics. The gun needed to be a pistol that's cheap because, well, as we said, pistols are useless. Yet it needed to work when a pistol would be required, and it needed to be a status symbol. The pistol accomplishes all of these things. But we've already established that pistols aren't of much use in a military context, especially then, so was it worth doing? Yeah, because of the life this pistol has had. It was certainly a status symbol for communist officers initially, as planned, but more than that, it went on to be used as a genuine combat arm in many countries, across many decades, in many forms. It's still in use today. I'd say it was pretty damn successful, wouldn't you? From conscripts to child soldiers to obese basement preppers, this gun had some goddamn legs. There's a landmine joke in there somewhere, but even I don't have the heart to make that one. The child soldiers got their legs blown off. So the Makarov is almost the communist 1911. Only the Makarov actually runs all of the time, unlike my 1911. Let's take a moment to compare the Makarov to the 1911. Could there be 2 more opposing design philosophies? The 1911 aims to be a genuinely competent combat arm, firing a relatively potent cartridge for a pistol cartridge. The gun is heavy, large, and requires a high degree of hand fitting. It has 49 parts, so like Americans, the 1911 is big, fat, and wasteful. The Makarov, on the other frail, starving hand, is small, relatively light for the time when guns were big hunks of steel, and the Makarov had parts that are cheaper and faster to manufacture and assemble. The Makarov only has 27 parts. If the 1911 is too fat, the Makarov is starving. Arms imitate culture, I suppose. So I hate when gun channels repeat the same facts over and over again. The just Wikipedia shit that everyone knows. You know the Makarov replaced the Tokarev. And who used it? You know the PB model is used for executions in Belarus and all the other standard shit that everyone says. So what might you not know about the Makarov? Well, for one thing, the Makarov is not really based on the Walther PP, at least not as directly as you've probably been told. The PP was certainly the inspiration, but in the same way the Walther PPQ isn't a Glock 19, the Makarov is not a Walther PP. Well, that's a sentence I've longed to say, that the PP certainly was the inspiration. I'm going to write this video script in such a way that I get to say PP as much as possible. That's going to be a lot of fun. So instead, this is really the ultimate refinement of the ideas introduced in the PP, let's say. The idea of a fixed barrel blowback gun with the spring coiled around the barrel that disassembles via a trigger guard that pulls down to release the slide. So after the PP made its mark, that almost became a sort of classic of gun. Again, in the way the Glock-type striker-fired pistol became a variety of gun. So the Makarov isn't a PP clone any more than the other guns of this type. The PP just sort of became a sort of gun that one could produce. But again, this is probably the pinnacle of that sort of design. It's just so simple. It contains 27 parts. How awesome is that? So a bit about my gun. You're actually going to see two guns today. Both are Bulgarian, purchased from two different lots at the Mosin crate. You all have shared your surplus purchasing horror stories with me. Many of you have had terrible experiences shopping at Classic Firearms and a few other places. I get that. So for the love of God, buy from the Mosin crate. I've never had a bad experience, and the guns are usually far nicer than I'm expecting. You also get to talk to Alden, who is the nicest guy ever. He didn't pay me to say this, but I just want to steer you towards someone who will do you right. Seriously, if you're going to buy a Makarov, I don't know if anybody else will get them, but he's the guy. That's the place to get them. Also, I hope you get some more of those Israeli high power soon. I'd really like to buy one of those. All right, now let's take a detailed look inside the Makarov. Features. The Makarov is a small, blowback, double-action, single-action, hammer-fired pistol chambered in 9x18 Makarov. Double action means that the first trigger pull also cocks the hammer and then drops it, firing a round. The trigger is performing two actions, a double action. After your first round, or if you've cocked the pistol, the hammer will be cocked in this position. Pulling the trigger will release the hammer, firing a round. You're performing one action when the trigger is pulled, a single action. The Makarov weighs 26 ounces, so more than a Glock, but the gun is all steel and very sturdy. The grips are Bakelite, and I've seen many different shades and colors. I work in the music industry, and Bakelite used to be a common material for guitar knobs and pick guards. It's very cool stuff that ages in an interesting and unique way. This gun has a safety and decocking lever on the side. If the gun isn't cocked, pushing the lever up simply puts the gun on safe. This locks the slide, the hammer, and the trigger. Pushing the lever down takes the gun off safe and frees the slide, trigger, and hammer. We can now freely cock the gun again. If we push the lever up while the hammer is cocked, it will decock and the gun will be on safe again. And also, again, we're locking the slide, hammer, and trigger. You can either carry the gun on safe, or you can take it off safe and just use the initial long, heavy double action pull as your safety. If you carry it on safe, remember you're going to have to take the safety off and you'll still have the long double action pull. This gun has a slide lock lever, which is atypical for guns of this size. I'd say that lever is one of the features that really helps this feel like a larger service pistol. The gun locks open on the last round fired. You insert a new magazine, and then press the lever to drop the slide and chamber a round, of course. Or at least we would if the magazine we're using here weren't empty. Or you can also use the lever to hold the slide open, even if no magazine is present. Lovely. So why am I showing you all of this elementary bullshit? Because a lot of you have never seen some of these older guns. A large portion of the folks watching this video, and by that I mean 2 out of the 3 people watching, are into newer stuff like, Glocks and AR-15s and all that other stuff that we look at pretty often on this channel. But I have a very strong interest in the older stuff. Not that the Makarov is as ancient as some designs, but it is older. So I like to show you the ins and outs of it to really give you a feel for what it's like to actually hold the gun in your hand. The sights are small. Pretty standard for the era. Not great, but they hit where they're pointed. The Makarov has a magazine release catch at the heel. It's just a piece of spring steel that's folded over to double as a mainspring. We'll look at that later. To remove the magazine, push the catch rearward. This will release the magazine, though they don't really drop free. Then you get a hold of this lip on the base plate that, like other multi-use parts of this gun, doubles as a finger rest. Then you pull out the magazine. The magazine holds 8 rounds, and they have this big open window that lets you see how many rounds you've got in the mag. Oh, and I should probably show you, this little tab here is super sharp and will cut the fucking shit out of your finger. In keeping with our theme of parts that pull double duty, it also presses up on the slide lock when it gets to the top of the magazine. It's very clever. The Makarov round is interesting. Though 9x18 millimeters, roughly, it's shorter and fatter than 9mm Parabellum. It's also a bit longer than 380, which is 9x17, of course. I won't go into all the interchangeability myths. You've heard them all, and they're all bullshit. The Makarov cartridge descends from 9x18 Ultra, a very interesting cartridge that you might enjoy reading about. As for power, 9x18 is the most powerful of the blowback cartridges, generally speaking. I'm sure there's some Wildcat cartridge out there that one guy reloads that's more powerful, but just generally speaking, 9x18 is kind of at the top of the power range for a blowback cartridge. It packs about as much of a wallop as a cartridge can before you really have to go to some sort of locked breech action. 9x18 is notably more powerful than .380 range ammo. Wolf and Tula 9mm Makarov is of similar power level to defensive .380 at 210 to 215 foot-pounds of energy. However, 9mm Makarov loads intended for defense, like those from Underwood, Buffalo Bore, and those crazy Silver Bear hollow points that were so powerful, some of those go as high as 260 foot-pounds out of the Makarov. That's pretty substantial. Although I hear folks speak of 9mm Makarov as though it's almost as powerful as 9x19, that's not true at all. But 9x18 Makarov is definitely the king of the little cartridges, 22 LR, 25, 32, .380. In other words, all the calibers that I've enjoyed shooting during the quarantine because they're actually available. By the way, don't run brass case ammo through your Makarov, not because it hurts anything, but because it's a fucking waste of money. I like you, I guess, and I don't want to see you waste your money. These guns don't give a shit what you run through them, so just buy the shitty steel stuff and run those through the Makarov. It doesn't care. The Makarov seems to have a serious problem with self-respect, because like Donald Trump, it doesn't give a shit what it eats, and it can't tell a difference anyway, so why give it something nice? It doesn't taste the difference between a day-old Big Mac and Toro tuna, so just feed it ketchup on Doritos or white rice in a bag slathered in butter. It'll shove anything nearby into its gullet. It doesn't give a shit. So just don't waste your money or your good tuna, I guess. So earlier I said the gun is blowback. Well, what exactly does that mean? Well, that means that unlike a Glock or Beretta or 1911 or really almost any gun chambered in 9x19 or larger, the Makarov does not have a locked breech action. The Makarov's action is only held closed by the weight of the slide and the pressure from the recoil spring. These two forces resist the rearward movement from the round firing just long enough for pressures inside the chamber to drop to safe levels. Let's take a look at that process. But first, I mentioned that the Glock has a locked breech, and so does the Beretta 92. What does that look like? Well, the Glock's barrel moves rearward with the slide for a short distance before dropping once it has space to do so, tilting upward, unlocking where the barrel interfaces with the slide, allowing the cartridge to be extracted and ejected. Or if you're looking at the rear of the barrel, you could also say that it tilts downward, I suppose. Most modern 9mm guns, and those chambered in 40, 45, and 10mm and the like, they use the Browning tilting barrel action. The Beretta 92 accomplishes the same thing using a different mechanism, borrowed from the Walther P38. Once again, the slide and barrel move rearward initially, before the locking block that was carrying them back together drops away, stopping the barrel, causing the slide to continue rearward until it extracts and ejects the round, and then chambers a new one when it moves back forward. Again, the barrel and slide are held together until pressures inside the chamber drop. When we watch the Makarov cycle, we don't see the barrel move at all, do we? Look, that is staying fixed in place. You can also see that the recoil spring is far stiffer than that of the Glock or the Beretta. Between the barrel and slide, only the slide is moving. The round detonates, and all that the rearward force of the explosion has to overcome is the spring and the weight of the slide. That's it. There's really no simpler mechanism of operation, is there? But you can see why we can't have a round more powerful than 9x18, which is already almost pushing it. You'd have to have a much larger gun with a much stiffer recoil spring to shoot something more powerful. Let's take a look inside. To disassemble the Makarov, cock the hammer, as we did, and lock the slide open. You don't have to lock it open, but it makes things easier. Then pull down on the trigger guard and pull it to either side. I'll pull it to the side facing you so that you can see. We just need to get one side of the V-notch resting in the frame. This looks awkward as fuck, because it is awkward as fuck. This is one aspect that was borrowed directly from the Walther PP, because it's very simple. As we'll see inside the gun, it just works. Now pull the slide rearward and up. You'll feel that it now wants to come off of the gun. Then remove the recoil spring, and do so gently. We don't want to kink the spring. And I removed the recoil spring off camera because I didn't want to yank too hard on it with my arms extended and kink it. So that is a field stripped Makarov. Not much to it, right? With the slide removed from the gun, we get a better view of how the action actually works. Unlike the last blowback gun we looked at, the Beretta Cheetah, the barrel is directly pinned to the frame. And I'll include some high quality photos too, or as high quality as I'm capable of taking. Let's pop the trigger guard back into place. You can see that it protrudes into the frame just under the barrel. All this does is hold the slide forward so that it can't move back far enough to be lifted off the rails via these cutouts on the slide. And I'll include photographs of the cutouts as well. And here they are, these cutouts, these sections of rail pass through them to release the slide. And these are the sections of rail. When the trigger guard is up, that piece of metal won't let the slide go back far enough to line up the rail sections with the cutouts in the slide. It's so fucking simple and smart. I love it. The slide is as simple as the frame. There's just not much here, is there? The decocking mechanism is simple but effective and safe. There's no firing pin safety. There's no firing pin safety of any kind, not even an inertial one. Instead, the firing pin is just free in there. However, it's very small and light, and it doesn't have enough mass to cause trouble. I can't find any record of one going off from being dropped or jostled, although we wouldn't really have records from the Soviet Union, even if there had been a problem. That's not the sort of thing that was likely to have been recorded. The pin really is too light to cause a problem, but you should at least know that there's no safety in there. We can take the grip off by removing this screw and just sliding them off. I love the Bakelite grip. I gave the Fab Defense one a try, and it didn't fit on my two Bulgarians, even with some pretty heavy file work on my part. That just didn't work. So back to the Bakelite, which looks better anyway. Here, I'll put that back up for now. Just wiggle those off, and that's all that's underneath. Some Cosmoline still on my gun. Check out the mainspring. It's just a piece of spring steel folded over and clamped to the frame. I love that. And what they did with the bottom of the piece of steel is super cool. Mr. Makarov designed a little loop that forms the magazine catch. That is fucking genius. Truly genius. Look at that. Yeah. Yeah, you just push that back. Mainspring does double duty. Truly genius. This gun is really a remarkable design feat, isn't it? Even now, 70 years later, we'd struggle to design a gun this elegantly simple. We'll get that magazine out of there. But there's something we have to discuss before we reassemble our Bakelite adorned friend. The machining in here, it's a fucking wreck, isn't it? Look at it. There are tool marks everywhere, and the milling is very, very crude. Look at that spot. Check out the inside of the slide. My other Makarov is even worse than this one in places. It's funny to see this beautifully polished exterior and then this mess inside. But it doesn't matter. If you look at all the surfaces where parts move against each other, they are perfectly smooth. They only polished what needed to be polished and nothing else. That's why this gun feels so damn slick. Remarkably slick. Even the finishing and fitting procedure is smart. I just love this gun. All right, let's put it back together. So first, let's put the grip back on it, because that'll make everything else easier. Squeeze that back on there. Get the screw back in. Get that tight enough. So first, put the recoil spring back on the barrel like so. Make sure that the trigger guard is pulled down and to the side, with one side of the V-notch resting on the frame. Now we've got to put the barrel through this hole in the slide at an angle. It feels all wrong, but the hole in the slide is cut large enough to make this easy. You'll have to fight the recoil spring a little bit, kind of wiggle it around, pull the slide rearward, and then give it a wiggle, and it'll pop back into place. You can sort of feel where the frame rails want to go in the cutouts in the slide. This is also the point at which the slide won't go back any further. Then wiggle it like I was showing you, and it'll pop back into place. You'll feel the slide catch onto the frame. It's not as tricky as it looks, and you'll get it in a pinch. Now lift the trigger guard back into place and check function. All good. If you enjoy my work, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Your support is what makes it possible for me to do 1,600 round endurance reviews of an older surplus pistol like the Makarov. Your support, in addition to keeping me at the range, also gives you access to the TGP Discord server where we talk about guns and movies and video games and all kinds of other cool stuff. We have a really good time, and we'd love for you to join us over there. All right, back to the show. So how has the Makarov performed? This gun has been extremely reliable. You see, 9x18 has been one of the few readily available rounds during the pandemic, so I've shot the hell out of this gun. Though I have two, I mostly shoot this one. It's got about 1,600 rounds through it, 1,620 to be precise without a hitch. The other one has under 200. I just wanted to check and make sure that it worked. I've shot Wolf, Tula, Brown Bear, and Barnaul or Barneau. I don't know how the fuck you say that. We'll call it Barnaul. I like the way that sounds better with my southern accent. It doesn't care which I shoot, this gun. It doesn't give a shit, and all those rounds suck and smell terrible, especially the Brown Bear. Though Barneau or Barnaul makes Brown Bear, the Barnaul branded ammo has burned the cleanest and smelled the least like rotting marshmallows and roadkill. As of this moment, August of 2020, 9mm Makarov is drying up, though. I think the moment has passed for this caliber, and it's no longer the available bulk cartridge. Makarovs just work. If other Makarov owners are to be believed, I may go for years without a malfunction. But I'm going to do a long-term test for myself with this one to at least get to 6,000 rounds and tell you what I find. Who knows, maybe I'll have the only two troublesome Makarovs in the world, but I doubt it. So far, they've been excellent. The one I've been shooting the most has been cleaned twice, once when I got it to take off some of the extra cosmoline still inside, and again before filming today. Although you see, there is still a shitload of cosmoline in there. I just haven't been able to get it all, and it leaks out of places I didn't even know were inside the gun. It's everywhere, but that's part of the pleasure of owning a Makarov. You get used to it. These require minimal maintenance and can be virtually neglected from what I hear, and my experience seems to indicate that as well. These guns are very pleasant to fire, and that's the reason I own two. Let's look at the trigger first. The DA pull is long and heavy, as one would expect, though this is excessively heavy. However, to counter that, it's extremely smooth, with no hitches or binding or stacking. Look at that. If it were about 5 pounds lighter, we would rave about this DA pull. Let's see it again. Again, not bad besides the weight. It's great. How about the single action pull? Let's see. Well, there's no wall of any kind, just an incredibly smooth rolling break. I love this single action pull. I fucking love it. I'm crazy about it. It's your reward after the DA pull. I can't disguise my love of this trigger pull. It just feels straight up weird, more like a Glock trigger than a DASA pull. Very strange, but so pleasant. It's not mushy though. It's just slick. I love a rolling break. It's the reason I've come to really kind of love Glock triggers in the last year or two. I enjoy how fast you can shoot a trigger like that. Let's see that single action pull one more time. So again, no wall, just pull rearward, and somewhere in there it breaks. Let's take a look at the reset. The reset is audible and tactile, but not as tactile as I'd like. You get used to it, but it's not super clear when it's reset. It works, though. You can get a feel for it. The reset is too long. Did you see that? It's almost at the start of travel again. Yeah, I could definitely deal with a shorter reset. But then you've got that awesome rolling break again, and that makes up for it. So when you're shooting this gun in a hurry, that reset's not going to really matter, and that's the benefit of a rolling break. Because your finger just moves rearward unimpeded by a wall, you can almost slap the trigger with wanton abandon and still keep your shots where you want them. Let's take a look at the reset again. Yeah, it's long and quiet, but it's not bad at all. And God, that break, I just can't tell you how good that break is. It's beautiful. You just pull the trigger rearward, it's so smooth, and then somewhere in there you get your shot. I love it. To recap, the double action pull is way too heavy and the reset is long, but the single action pull is one of the weirdest and most satisfying that I've ever tried. I love it. Despite being fucking heavy, this gun is slim and easy to keep on your person. There are a lot of folks who carry these. Even though I'd shot Makarovs on many occasions, I'd just forgotten kind of how small they are. It was a very different time when service pistols could be a bit smaller. The grip, especially the classic Bakelite, just feels great. I love it. Very natural and slim, but with enough at the back to fill your palm and let you easily control the gun. But there's very little texturing on the Bakelite, and really none on the front strap. Just have our import marks there. So when I get sweaty, this gun wants to slide around. The slide release is a good one. I like the way it sticks out from the frame, but it's still rounded, so it doesn't get in the way. It's just a good design. It's easy to whack it in a hurry. The decocker on both of mine, very stiff. Let's look at it on the other one. It's not as stiff on this one. That gun is a little bit less stiff in general, but I like the trigger a little bit more on this one. But still, both of them are much stiffer than I would like for them to be. That stiffness makes it so that using the safety really sucks, because you have to very much mean to take it off. It's not as simple to sweep as the safety on a 1911 coming out of a holster. However, that also means that you can just ignore the safety, which is my own personal preference. This is a double action, single action gun. The double action pull after decocking the gun is our safety. It's heavy, and that's the safety that I personally prefer. I cannot find a primary source for this, but internet wisdom says that Soviet doctrine was to carry the Makarov without a round in the chamber. That Soviet holster, the EFA, I think it is, that chambers around when you draw, kind of points to this. But again, no primary sources, and I don't think that was exactly the standard issue holster. But I don't know, and I don't think anybody really knows definitively. Whatever doctrine was at the time, we can tell something about the designer's intent based on how the controls work. The safety is stiff and out of the way. I have to almost change my grip to take it off. Decocking the gun is stiff and requires force. You can't carry it cocked and locked. So I think we can infer that Nikolai Makarov thought the gun should be carried with a round in the chamber, either on safe or relying only on the double action pull. So the sights are small by modern standards, but decent for the time. I find them perfectly workable and comparable to contemporary Western pistols of the time. They hit what you're aiming at, and I can hit a man-sized target at 50 yards if I go slow. However, in low light, these suck. And the light doesn't really need to be all that low, anything other than perfect conditions, and they're kind of tough to make out. But to be fair, the same goes for the 1911 at the time, and the High Power and the Beretta 1951. The magazine release is a heel release, and doubles as the mainspring, working hard in multiple careers, performing the hard work assigned to it by the state for the good of the many, like any good communist firearms part. And like a communist job assignment, the mainspring isn't really qualified to be a magazine release, and they should have found a qualified professional to do the job, like the Tokarev magazine release. But they couldn't find any because they shot them all in the purge. The mag release is recessed, and you push it rearward, dropping the magazine slightly, and then you pull it out by the lip of the base plate. Not ideal. You're not going to be doing any quick mag changes with the Makarov, but it gets the job done. So what's the overall firing experience like? Well, it's pleasurable, but it takes some getting used to. Earlier we discussed that locked breech guns work differently from blowback guns like the Makarov here. Well, locked breech guns also feel different to shoot. As they take more time to open and cycle, a gun with a tilting barrel action is going to have a less jarring recoil impulse, even firing a heavier caliber. The Makarov cycles very quickly, and as a result, it transfers all of that recoil energy directly back into your hand in an instant. It isn't a ton of recoil, but it's quicker, and as a result, it feels snappier. A Browning action gun in 9mm still has substantially more recoil than the Makarov, but though it doesn't seem like it, it doesn't transfer into your hand all at the same time, even if it does feel spontaneous to you, the shooter. So the Makarov doesn't have much muzzle flip, and it's very easy to control, even if it feels punchy and snappy and all those other words we like to use. You have to adjust to this new recoil impulse. A slight change to grip might be required. The slide is large relative to the frame. There's not really anywhere to put your thumbs when they're going forward. I kind of was having to tuck them under, and I was finding that a modern thumbs forward grip left a little gap at the back of the grip. That doesn't happen with a modern firearm, obviously. It's just the way the grip is shaped. It sort of guides your thumbs in close to the frame. So for me, the Mossad Ayub Crush Grip works a bit better. Like I do with a small revolver, maybe. That made this gun even more controllable. So once I nailed down my grip, it became very easy to get good, fast hits with this gun. It's remarkably quick. And you can shoot this gun at remarkably long ranges too, if, you can see the sights. You kind of have to be doing that on a bright afternoon. This gun takes some adapting, but it's worth the time if you're willing to put that in. Is the Makarov still useful? As I told you in the beginning, yes, I think it is. Most of the Soviet weapons, unlike communism itself, have had great longevity. Though that's not to say that this gun isn't dated. Before we talk about what you might do with the gun, let's talk about which features have aged poorly. Really just the weight, the grip, and the magazine release. You can work with the other stuff. The gun is also too fucking heavy. A Makarov with an aluminum or polymer frame would be great. And while we're at it, throw a modern push-button magazine release on there. The Fab Defense grip with a sliding magazine release is nice, but it doesn't fit on either of my Makarovs. I don't know, maybe I just had bad luck with my 2 or something, I don't know. Lastly, texture the fucking front strap and back strap for the love of God. So if you change that stuff, this gun would be even more relevant than it already is. The sights work fine, I can live with those, but it'd still be nice if we had some more modern sights. So what could you use this gun for? Well, it's so slim, it'd be great for concealed carry. And yes, I'm serious. There are good holster options, it's comfortable, it fires an adequate defensive round, and ammo is somewhat available, depending on when you're viewing this and whether or not the world has ended. For home defense, though, you need to go with something bigger. But for concealed carry on a budget, some of the modern options are worse than the Makarov. A few of the small 380s aren't nearly as reliable as the old Makarov, so it's still worth a look. Final thoughts. The Makarov is an interesting gun with an interesting trigger, interesting construction, with an interesting history, firing an interesting round. For carry, it's an interesting choice, I guess. Is it the best choice? Oh, God, no. I'm not telling you to buy this over a Glock 42 and carry it. You'd be crazy to do that. But I am telling you that these guns haven't expired. Just because 70 years have passed doesn't mean that the gun won't get you out of a bad situation. And maybe you're just bored of modern guns. Maybe you just like to be different. Maybe this is your only gun. Whatever the case may be, this gun definitely doesn't suck, and it works like a charm. I do this series because I want to show that some of our modern ideas about carry are overly constrained and silly, and that whatever you have is probably good enough. I also want to show the way technology has and hasn't changed over the years. And more than anything, I want to kill the myth that smaller cartridges aren't deadly. They certainly are, though wouldn't we all rather have 9mm HSTs in our gun all the time? Of course we would. But sometimes something smaller is what you need. Thanks for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. I'll talk to you soon. Good night.